By this part, you know what you're in for. That is, more from the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Let's begin. Two more novelettes today. The Shadows of Alexandrium by David Gerrold, and My Name Was Tom by Tim Powers. We're going to start with the cover story, which is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in the Library of Alexandria. The Shadows of Alexandrium by David Gerrold. Fun fact about David Gerrold, he was the writer who came up with the tribbles for the episode of the original series of Star Trek, originally calling them, I believe, the Fuzzies, but that name was taken by another science fiction writer for another story, so they changed it to the tribbles. So how's that for a little sci-fi fun fact? David Gerrold notes in the introduction, as you might assume by the fact that he wrote in the Star Trek original series, has been writing a lot of science fiction for many, many years. This is a great story, I think, for a younger audience. It is certainly, appropriate for any age, but I think this, as I mentioned in my introduction, this is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in space. The title obviously references the Library of Alexandria. However, this enormous quantum library has been built on the edge of a black hole. So it essentially is constantly in this state of it exists and also it should not exist, which is the core concept that floats throughout the story. There is this being called the Proctor, which is the tour guide for the library of Alexandrium, the Alexandrium this complex is called. And the Proctor is a rather, I would say, has an innocent, lighthearted manner of speaking that belies the actual intelligence and sort of like omnipotence that exists within the Proctor, very much in the way that Gene Wilder portrayed Willy Wonka in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory film, and that was immediately recognizable to me, as there are 5 characters that essentially follow him around, the Proctor around, that are in many ways very similar to the children along with Charlie that follow Willy Wonka around in the Chocolate Factory. So this library is touted to be a location where all of the histories that did not happen exist. So let's say a war destroys a civilization, then this library will house the future of that civilization. Perhaps they go on to create a new form of art. That art that did not exist is housed in this library. It is a library that is limited only by the imagination of its patrons. So in the beginning of this story, it is noted that this library is very gaudy and over the top, and that is sort of hinted at as the creation of one of these guests that's going along with it, with the Proctor. And then at some point during their tour, they find that there is a dark, endless corridor that they cannot see down, and they begin to become curious about what is down that hall. And the Proctor says that is one of the ever-expanding locations within the library that has yet to be formed. They begin to explore and venture deeper out into this dark hallway until it becomes clear that the fears are eating away at the patrons of the library, and they're beginning to imagine horrifying creatures and different threats that do not exist, and thus they are making them manifest within these dark corners of the library. The Proctor decides to tell them to stop imagining bad things, because they will become true, and instead leads them to an enormous elevator. Initially, the elevator does not work, as they are still afraid, and of course they're imagining the worst. So the elevator takes on the properties of the worst. It's creaky, it shakes a little bit as they're moving. But as these patrons of the library get bored, suddenly everything falls away, and then they are in nowhere. the titular shadows of Alexandrium make their appearance, and the fear within the patrons resumes once again, as they're not sure what those things are. They're shadows in the distance, and it turns out that they are the patrons' own shadows that they are somewhat afraid of, and they are sort of they are extracted from this location, and one of the patrons enters a new door into a grassy field, essentially the escape from the Library of Alexandria with the proctor, and it is revealed that everything, the patrons included, and including the proctor, with the exception of this one character, were all simply possibilities within the Library of Alexandria. They were their own creations, the creations of the mind. And so this story as a whole is commenting, I think, on the act of creation. It very much ties into that poem that is the poem they chose for this book, The Writing of Science Fiction, which seems to comment on the idea that the limited mindset that can create all of these horrors and terrible things, but look at what this library can do when you have some imagination. There's just there's an endless amount of choices to be made, and the ones that you choose are the ones that create your story. So it's a pretty interesting little concept, and of course, as I mentioned, this is obviously very reminiscent of sort of the story arc of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, all the way up until, all of the children have been whisked away by the magical land. All of the patrons of the library just sort of disappear, and we're left with the Charlie character, in this case, one of the women, a woman that has a camera and is attempting to photograph all of the things, but the proctor tells her, no, you can't do that in here. And the proctor is very much that Willy Wonka character, complete with a big elevator that goes to nowhere at the end of the story. Isn't that an interesting little parallel? Anyway, I thought this was a good condensing of that idea down, and of course it has a different point than Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That's more about the innocence of childhood and making sure to promote those ideas of like trust and not stealing and all that stuff. But anyway, the Shadows of Alexandrium is much more about inspiring creativity within and creativity and choosing your path instead of letting others take it over for you. So yeah, I think it's a good little story. It's certainly one that I think is better suited to younger audiences, and a fun science fiction story. My Name Was Tom by Tim Powers. It was a little bit more of a challenge for me to interpret. This is a story that makes allusions to sort of a future of essentially the United States, but it's never quite clear to me what point he's trying to make with the story. The premise is that a bunch of people live on this enormous boat, and have been living there for so long that they have begun to form essentially their own little regions, their own cultures in different locations on the ship. There has even developed a religion around the idea of the enigmatic bridge, going on a pilgrimage to find the bridge, and also to see the map where a little icon of a ship is said to be moving toward their destination, and sort of everyone's interested in how far has the ship moved, as though no one can see outside or find any land outside. So the titular character of Tom, is searching for his runaway wife, who is said to be very adventurous and has gone missing. And so he is running around. Eventually, his goal is getting to the bridge. And in doing so, he explores some of the cultures that have developed on the ship, as well as the places on the ship that have been abandoned. And he comes to a group that he calls the Plimsoll Line Gypsies. These are people who have constructed a ramshackle civilization on the side of the ship through found materials. And one particular rather muscular character of Blue Peter tells Tom essentially how to find the bridge and gives him a map, a very complex document that requires essentially folding over multiple edges of a piece of paper in order to produce the correct path through the ship. And this labyrinthine vessel is described as almost trying to stop anyone from getting to their destination, as if the ship itself is alive and rearranging corridors to ensure that everyone stays in line. However, Tom does manage to find the fabled bridge, which it turns out is helmed by an alien of sorts, and he eventually does find his wife Ruth there. However, they have a strange conversation about the future and how the alien is trying to create one from many. Of course, the phrase "e pluribus unum," from many one. And in the process, Tom the alien tells Tom that he must shed his old identity in order to come to this new world with the alien. And at this point, Tom sort of goes mad a little bit, runs away, and returns to the hull of the ship and says that he's going to go and find these Plimsoll Line Gypsies again. Ending with the phrase, if I can find it here, I hope to at least not go forward. One of the things that is said of these gypsies is they say, we hope that if we cannot go back, we can at least not go forward. And there's a note that when Tom finds the bridge, there is the grand map that has a crystal display of the ship in the Atlantic Ocean, presumably sailing away from the United States. And there's a meter that says full, mid, slow, and then the last word is blocked out by the fact that the arrow is pointing at it, which is presumably stop. The ship is not moving and has not been moving for some time. And in fact, it's unclear whether this is actually a ship at all, as the alien points out that the entire ship, the center of the ship, where the narrator found the Plimsoll Line Gypsies, was actually a large cylinder that I don't know if it's clear that there's a cap or not, but the ocean is presumably on the inside of the ship. So it's more than likely that this was never a ship all along, and that the Plimsoll Line Gypsies on the inside are actually delusioned into the idea that they can sail away, but really they are just sailing further inside the ship. So that's why I sort of say that this was somewhat of a difficult story to really draw a conclusion from. There's sort of that element of Lovecraftian horror in the idea that the closer you come to reaching the truth, the less it makes sense. And if I were to pull something from this, I would say that it is that the narrator, through his experience of encountering all of these different groups upon the ship, and running away from the alien that says if you shed your identity, you can advance to the next place, it is sort of reflecting on the idea that perhaps the complete eradication of individuality and culture in order to become one homogeneous culture or something negatively abandons the things that make each region interesting and the history and all that stuff. Other than that, I'm not really sure what to take away from that story. I did a little digging and found that this particular author, Tim Powers, penned the short story on Stranger Tides, which was sort of pulled from for the Pirates of the Caribbean film of the same name. I don't believe that they're actually related, but I think the general premise was taken from his story. So maybe I'm reading into it further than I should, but it's an interesting setting for sure. Although it's there's very little that's actually done to flesh out what the reality is once the character of Tom reaches the bridge. It sort of implies the outside is just a bizarre miasma. So I sort of interpreted it as this is an enormous starship, and the alien has abducted everyone. As many of the characters sort of reference the idea that they were lifted into this ship rather and sort of extracted from their homeland rather than going willingly. Although that too may simply be a fairy tale told through so many generations removed of having lived on this ship. So yeah, that was My Name Was Tom. And hey, it turns out that Leah Cypess's Of Them All actually turned out to be a quicker read than I expected, so I'm throwing it in this part of the video as well. A little bonus. Leah Cypess's Of Them All, of course, references the couplet from Snow White. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Now, the story is not strictly about any of the Snow White story plot elements. However, it is a study on the effects of beauty and on power and political relationships and all that. It is a story about princesses and a magical fairy kingdom, and it's clearly not aimed at me. But nonetheless, I think it's a good little story. It certainly goes much further with the concept than I would have expected. So the general premise is that this particular kingdom has a relationship with the fairies in their area, and the fairies, anytime a royal is born, they bestow upon them a gift at their celebration, and the fairies have this antagonistic relationship with the Duergar in the icy kingdom, and they're sort of bestowing gifts upon these children that can be used against the Duergar. The first princess is sort of plain and normal, but she's gifted with an incredible vocal talent, which can be used as a weapon against the Duergar. And the other princess, who is our protagonist anti-hero, essentially, is given the both blessing and a curse, as she is told that those who wish her harm will find her beautiful, and those who wish her no harm will find her plain and unattractive. And so the story explores her relationship with that power, essentially. She becomes sort of drunk with this ability to wield influence over those who wish her harm, as long as she manages to dominate them, essentially. And is envious of those, and frustrated with those who she does not have power over because they do not find her attractive. And so these gifts cause a fight between the sisters, and a prince from the Frozen Kingdom comes over to marry the sister who can sing, because he does not find the other sister attractive. And this sort of sets off the events that are going on. So there's this very tense political situation between the two countries, and it's constantly kind of twists and turns about where the politics are going to go. The prince that marries the sister, it's later revealed that he's not able to have a child, and so he's not really going to be the heir to the kingdom, and it was all sort of a hostage situation. And then the other sister's falling in love with the older brother, the younger brother, who is sort of a wild man and doesn't care about any of that stuff. and who turns out to really not care about any of this in going on. And so the result of all this is that a third child is born to the fairy kingdom lands, and that child is a boy who is gifted with the power to defeat his enemies. And so this is the moment at which they all sort of realize that, oh no, very quickly this can turn into a war between the two countries. And now that both daughters are sort of wed off to the Ice Kingdom's princes, this is going to be a problem for all of them. So the sister with the beauty decides that she wants to renounce the gift as people are beginning to turn against her, because like her sister was unable to have a child with the other prince, she is unable to have a child with her prince because of her gift. And so she seeks out the Dwargar to renounce that. And of course, that comes in the form of an apple, which is, another small reference to the Snow White stuff. So it's a decent story talking about kind of exploring that character's vanity and how she becomes drunk with power and then disillusioned with it, and is trying to decide, making choices in her best interest or against everything that's going on around her. Certainly not the kind of story that I care much for, but I think it's pretty well done, and there's multiple twists to it that build upon and explore that idea. Certainly taking it through to I think a satisfying conclusion. So anyway, those are all of the stories contained within this volume. So next up, I will be providing a brief conclusion where I give you my lightning fast summary of every single one of my reviews, come to a conclusion, and tell you what I think was the best of the stories out of this collection. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.